Have you ever laughed at someone because they looked like they didn't belong? Have you ever dismissed a soul because their clothes were worn, their shoes scuffed their skin darker than yours? What if the life you sneered at held the power to erase your world overnight? This isn't just a story. This is a warning. Watch carefully, judge too quickly, and you might just lose everything you thought was yours. The marble floors of the Hawthorne estate gleamed under the soft California sun chandeliers, like frozen galaxies, dripping gold light onto polished tables. Murmurs floated like smoke in the vast hall as heirs in designer suits and silk gowns sipped champagne, their laughter brittle and hollow. Amara. Louis stepped through the grand doors, her gray linen dress brushing her ankles, a soft blue cardigan slipping from one shoulder flats, worn but clean, tapping lightly against the marble. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. A man in a gold tie smirked and muttered loudly, "Is that housekeeping?" Another voice, shrill with cruelty, whispered, "Maybe she's here for catering. Wrong door, sweetheart." The laughter that followed was sharp, a knife glinting in the air. Amara didn't flinch. She only adjusted the strap of her canvas bag. Her deep brown eyes calm, her full lips pressed into a line of patient endurance. She walked with a grace that needed no approval, but the vultures smelled blood. A woman in a red cocktail dress scoffed. "Probably one of Victor's charity cases. Look at those thrift store shoes." Her friend giggled, snapping a photo with a manicured hand, captions already forming in her mind. Amara found a spot near the back of the room, by a window overlooking the sun-drenched vineyards. Her presence was a whisper against the roar of entitlement and old money. She stood still, hands loosely clasped in front of her, her cardigan sleeve slipping a little lower, revealing a simple bracelet, worn smooth with time. Someone nudged someone else, and phones discreetly angled to capture her image. Comments flooding social media within minutes. LOL. Who let the maid in? Epic crash at the will reading. Another gold digger spotted. Amara said nothing, not because she was weak, but because she had learned long ago that silence could be a blade sharper than any insult. And in that moment, with the crystal light fracturing around her, she knew something. They didn't. Something that would shatter their perfect little world before the sun set on the Hawthorne estate. The whispers turned into open mockery, sharp as broken glass. Under bare feet, a boy in a navy blazer slipped behind Amara, snickering as he taped a handwritten note to her canvas bag. The words, "Charity case," scrawled in black marker, bold enough for the whole room to see. Snickers and muffled laughter rippled through the crowd, like hyenas circling prey. A woman in pearls stage whispered, "Well, bless her heart, thinking Goodwill chic could pass here." Another leaned close enough for Amara to smell her designer perfume, muttering, "Bet she grew up on food stamps." Someone else louder now called out, "Who brought affirmative action to the will reading?" The laughter cracked like a whip, brittle and ugly. Amara tightened her grip on the strap of her bag, but her expression did not falter. Her dark brown eyes met the cruelty around her. Not with anger, not with tears, but with a chilling, unbreakable calm. She stood tall, her smooth skin radiant against the marble and the chandeliers. Her silence a mirror, forcing them to see their own ugliness. Someone bumped into her, deliberately pretending it was an accident, a glass of champagne nearly sloshing onto her linen dress. "Oops, my bad, sweetheart, didn't see you there." The voice was syrupy sweet, laced with venom. Amara merely stepped aside, her face carved from patience. The gold-tied man leaned closer to his sister, whispering with a smirk, She's probably here hoping to land a rich white husband. The sister giggled behind a manicured handphones, continued snapping comments, exploding on Instagram. Just another broke girl trying her luck. Maybe she'll clean up after the reading. The humiliation layered itself thicker with every breath. Racism, classism, cruelty dripping like oil down the walls. Yet Amara's stance never shifted, not even when another woman, an influencer with 1 million followers, live-streamed herself mocking Amara's outfit, zooming in on the worn flats and faded cardigan, captioning it, "When you show up to a billionaire's will," reading looking like an extra from a charity ad. The crowd's laughter roared again, deafening savage still. Amara did not flinch, her quiet strength screaming louder than any protest could her beauty, her grace, her restraint, setting her apart like a flame in a room full of smoke. And it was, at that very moment, when the cruelty had reached its peak, that the heavy oak doors at the front creaked open, and the estate's lawyer, Mr. Arthur Blackwell, strode into the room, his presence slicing through the noise like a knife. The laughter died in their throats, but the damage had already been done. The room barely had time to settle when Charles Whitmore, an austere man in a tailored charcoal suit, placed a thick envelope on the polished oak table. He adjusted his glasses, his voice calm but heavy with purpose. "As executor of Victor Hawthorne's estate, I will now read his final will and testament." The crowd stilled, predatory eyes turning eager, ready to feast on wealth. Charles broke the seal. The sound slicing through the thick tension, he unfolded the paper slowly, deliberately. The entire room leaning in like wolves scenting blood. He began, "I, Victor Alexander Hawthorne, being of sound mind and body, do hereby leave the entirety of my estate, valued at $62 billion in assets, properties, shares, and holdings." To one individual, a collective gasp rolled through the hall. Murmurs rose like a restless tide. "To my wife." Charles continued, his voice steady. "Amara Lewis Hawthorne." The words dropped like bombs, detonating chaos. Voices erupted in outraged disbelief, crashing through the room like a tidal wave. "Wife? What wife? This is a scam. Impossible. He wasn't married to her." Preston Vaughn, the man in the gold tie, shot to his feet, his face flushed red with fury. "That girl," he bellowed, jabbing a finger toward Amara, who stood calm and unflinching. "She's a fraud Victor would never marry." His voice cracked on the bile of his own prejudice. Clara West, the influencer, shrieked, "Where's the proof?" Gerald and Lillian Hayes, dripping in jewels and entitlement, demanded to see marriage certificates, bloodlines, DNA tests if needed. The lawyer raised his hand, his voice cutting through their hysteria, like iron through silk. "All documentation is in order, legally verified, notarized, and witnessed," he said, lifting a folder from his briefcase with clinical precision. "Marriage certificate filed in the state of New York 2 years ago." He held it up for the crowd to see the Hawthorne family, crest embossed in gold, at the corner. Photos slipped from the folder, candid snapshots of Victor and Amara together, laughing, embracing, living a life. None of these heirs had ever been invited into the room, cracked apart at the seams, accusations flying, faces paling, alliances crumbling. A woman screamed, a glass shattered. Preston lunged toward the table only to be restrained by a silent security guard. "Lies," he roared, spittle flying. "She seduced him. She stole him from us." Marissa Vaughn sobbed into her hands, her designer mascara streaking her cheeks like war paint. Clara fumbled with her phone, trying to delete the live stream before her millions of followers could see her downfall. The walls seemed to close in as realization dawned. Everything they had schemed for, smiled for, plotted for, was gone. Gone. To the black woman they had mocked, belittled, humiliated just minutes earlier, and through it all, Amara stood still, dignified, untouched by the storm she had never needed to summon. She simply was, and it was enough to destroy them. Amara stepped forward, her flats silent against the marble floor, her movements measured regal, without pretense. The room recoiled instinctively, as if her very presence threatened the lies they clung to. She reached into her simple cloth bag, the same one they had mocked, and withdrew a thin stack of documents bound neatly with a crimson ribbon. Her fingers steady her chin, lifted with quiet authority. She handed the papers to Charles Whitmore, without a word. He took them with a slight bow of respect, unfolding them with the gravitas of a priest handling sacred scripture. "For anyone who doubts," he said, his voice carrying over the ruins of the once cocky crowd, "here are the legal verifications." He lifted the first document, a marriage certificate from the state of New York, bearing the official seal, signed by Victor Alexander Hawthorne and Amara Lewis. Two witnesses, a county clerk, all authenticated. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the hall faces, drained of blood, mouths hanging open, but speechless. Charles continued unfazed, holding up a glossy photograph, Victor and Amara on the steps of a modest courthouse. She wore a simple white dress, a small bouquet in her hands. Victor in a gray suit smiling at her, like she was the only light in the universe. A wave of silence crashed over the room, choking it, suffocating it. Next came a handwritten letter from Victor, pages of affection and raw admiration for the woman who stood before them. Now, words describing her kindness, her wisdom, her soul. Not a mention of status or lineage, only love. Then bank records appeared, showing joint accounts, assets transferred years before, shares legally in both their names. Undeniable, irrefutable. The truth wrapped them like chains they could not break. Charles ended with a video projected onto the grand wall. Grainy footage but unmistakable. Victor and Amara exchanging vows before a judge, their laughter filling the small chamber. A kiss, a promise. A life built away from the greedy eyes, now burning with hatred. When the screen went dark, no one dared to breathe. The air was thick with humiliation, with the undeniable collapse of their delusions. Amara stood still in the center of it all, not triumphant, not cruel, simply present, her black skin glowing under the chandelier's harsh light. Her simple dress suddenly a banner of victory. The girl they had dismissed, mocked, degraded was not only Victor Hawthorne's wife. She was his everything, and now she was the sole heir to an empire they had coveted, but never deserved. Amara reached once more into her cloth bag, pulling out a small black remote, her fingers hovering over it with a calm finality. The crowd stiffened, whispers flaring like sparks on dry grass. She pressed the button, and the grand screen at the front of the room flickered to life, static. At first, then a dimly lit room appeared, and in its center, sitting straight in a simple leather chair, was Victor Hawthorne. Alive, unmistakable. His hair a little grayer. His face lined not by death, but by the weight of betrayal he had expected, and now witnessed. Gasps erupted. Some staggered backward, as if slapped. Others clutched the pearls and cufflinks that no longer shielded them from shame. Victor's voice broke the stunned air, calm, ironclad. "Good afternoon," he said, his eyes like blue fire staring directly through the screen into the souls of those gathered. "I am not dead, not lost at sea, not your absent checkbook. A collective moan shuddered through the room. Knees buckled. A woman in the back sank into her chair. Victor continued each word, deliberate. I chose to vanish because I needed to see the truth, to see who would remember me as a man, and who would remember only what I owned. He paused, his eyes darkening. You failed. The venom in his voice coiled around them, dragging their dignity into the mud. He leaned forward, the camera catching every line of controlled fury on his face. You mocked my wife, judged her by her skin, her dress, her heart, and not one of you showed the grace, the humanity, the loyalty that should have defined this family. A sob broke somewhere near the back of the hall. Someone else muttered a prayer under their breath, but no salvation came. Victor pressed on Merciless. You treated her worse than a stranger in the street. He raised a document into view. The same will they had just heard. This, he said, shaking it slightly, was never about money. His voice dropped to a deadly softness. This was about honor. He looked straight into the camera, and into each of them, as if piercing through the centuries of entitlement they had cloaked themselves in. Amara Lewis Hawthorne is my wife, he said slowly, irrevocably. She is the sole bearer of my legacy, the steward of everything I built, and the heart I trusted when I could trust no one else. Silence crushed the room, absolute, merciless. Amara stood under the flickering light, her head high, the weight of a world that tried to break her now, burning in her hands like a torch. Victor's final words rang out, a bell of reckoning. If you dishonored her, he said, you have dishonored me. Then the screen went black, leaving only the stunned breathing, the clinking of fallen jewelry, the collapse of everything they thought they knew. Victor's voice cut through the stunned silence once more. No screen needed now, only the sound of judgment long overdue. From this moment forward, he said, his words slow, merciless. Anyone who showed cruelty, racism, disdain toward my wife, Amara Lewis Hawthorne, is stripped of all inheritance rights and connection to my legacy. The words detonated like a bomb. Carter Hawthorne, who had sneered, the loudest, stumbled back, his face draining of color. You can't be serious, he barked, but his voice cracked under the weight of it. Bethany, in her emerald dress, shook her head violently, clinging to her designer clutch, like it could anchor her. This is insanity, she shrieked. Ryan, whose laughter had been the sharpest hours earlier, was now ghost pale, staring at the marble floor, as if it would split and swallow him whole. But Victor was relentless, naming names with the precision of a guillotine. Carter Hawthorne, Bethany Clark, Ryan Hale, Marla Weston, Jeffrey Langston. Each name fell like a hammer, pounding their illusions into dust. Your shares are void. Victor continued, his tone clinical, final. Your properties will revert to the Hawthorne Trust for redistribution to causes Amara deems worthy. Gasps ripped through the crowd. A woman fainted near the back. No one moved to catch her. Social media was already ablaze. The earlier cruel posts and mocking videos replaying in slow-motion horror across thousands of screens. The world watching the heirs of a dynasty devour themselves. Carter lunged forward, desperation warping his face. Victor, please. I was drunk. I didn't mean it. Victor's stare didn't waver, cold and cutting. You meant every word, he said, simple, brutal. Bethany sobbed into her hands, smearing her makeup into rivers of regret. Ryan turned away, ashamed, but there was no escape. No shelter from the storm they had called down upon themselves. By midnight, news broke globally. Hawthorne heirs disowned in racism scandal. Fortune 500 companies severed ties, University boards revoked honorary titles. Luxury brands stripped their endorsements within 24 hours. Carter's company shares plummeted to worthlessness. Bethany's real estate empire crumbled. Ryan was dropped from every board he sat on. Millions lost in hours. Their names forever stained, not by poverty, but by the ugliness they had once worn so proudly. Outside the estate gates, protesters gathered candles in hands, signs lifted, reading, "Honor over blood, and character is wealth." Inside Amara stood tall under the heavy chandeliers, a woman once mocked for her quiet dignity, now a queen without needing a crown. Victor at her side, no longer a specter, but a shield. The vultures had been cast out, their empire crumbling, not from a market crash, but from the weight of their own cruelty. Amid the chaos and collapse, Victor's voice softened, not with pity, but with reverence. "But not all failed," he said, and the air shifted. The cruelty that had poisoned the hall gave way to something cleaner, rarer. Victor turned his gaze, finding three faces in the crowd who had never once laughed, never once sneered, never once judged. Ava Reynolds. He called first, a middle-aged woman with kind gray eyes and hands still trembling from the tension of the morning. She had been a long-time nurse to the Hawthorne family, the only one who had offered Amara a glass of water quietly when she entered the estate. Miles Carter. Victor said next, a young accountant barely out of college who had held the door open for Amara, without hesitation, treating her like a guest, not an intruder. And Sofia Delgado. Victor finished his voice almost tender. An assistant who had smiled warmly at Amara offered her a seat when no one else would. The three stood frozen, disbelief and hope warring in their faces. Victor continued, "You showed dignity when no one else did." His words etched into the marble and memory alike. You judged no one by clothes or skin, but by humanity. The crowd, or what was left of it, stared bitter and broken as the three were invited forward. Ava, Miles, and Sophia stood beside Amara, their humility shining brighter than any diamond in the room. Effective immediately, Victor announced, "You are beneficiaries of the Hawthorne Trust." Gasps again, but different this time. Shocked admiration. Envy unspoken millions, now tied not to bloodlines, but to decency. Your acts of kindness, small as they seemed, revealed who you truly are. Victor's eyes burned into the room. In a world obsessed with status and appearance, you chose compassion. Outside news vans lined the long drive, the world desperate to understand how an empire was redefined, not by legacy of wealth, but by the currency of character. Amara reached for Ava's hand, squeezing it gently. Miles blinked rapidly, fighting tears. Sophia covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Victor turned to the cameras now beginning to roll. "Today," he said, "we redefine inheritance. Not by birthright, but by heart. Not by color, but by courage. Not by appearance, but by action." And as those words echoed, it was clear to everyone watching, from gilded towers to dusty sidewalks, that something irreversible had happened in that room. A storm had come and washed away the rot, and what remained was something rare, something pure, and something utterly unstoppable. As the last echoes of Victor's declaration faded, the once crowded hall now stood hollow and silent. Only a handful remained, those who mattered, those who had seen past fabric and skin, to the soul within. Victor turned to Amara, his hand reaching for hers, the gesture simple but seismic. She took it, their fingers interlocking, not as a show of dominance or triumph, but as a quiet promise, a bond formed long before wealth or war. Amara stepped forward, her voice calm, but thrumming with something deeper, unbreakable. "I did not come for fortunes," she said, and her words cut sharper than any blade. "I did not stand silent today for titles or gold." She turned slowly, letting her gaze settle on each stunned face. "What I sought was something far more precious." She paused, the weight of generations pressing against her, and still she stood tall. Respect. The word detonated in the silence, a bomb of truth they could not escape. Dignity. She continued, her voice gaining strength, not borrowed by the color of skin, nor dressed in silk and diamonds, but rooted in the unshakable truth that every soul deserves to be seen, to be valued. Victor's eyes glistened, but he made no move to interrupt her. This was her moment, her crown. "I loved Victor before any of you knew his name was worth billions," Amara said. "I loved him when his dreams were nothing but scraps on a desk and promises whispered in the dark." Murmurs stirred, but none dared speak, and he loved me not for the shade of my skin, nor the balance of my bank account, but for the fire in my soul and the courage in my heart. Her gaze softened slightly, landing on the three who had stood by her, then hardened again at the memory of the rest. "You cannot buy honor," she said. "You cannot fake love." The chandelier light caught her profile like a sculpture of resolve and grace. "Today, the Hawthorne legacy is not measured in dollars or estates," she said, lifting her chin. "It is measured in humanity." She looked at Victor, who nodded silently, his pride evident. "And I am proud." Amara finished, her voice a steady blazing flame. "Not because I own it, but because I reclaimed what was always mine. The right to be seen, the right to be loved without conditions, the right to walk into any room with her head held high, no matter what armor of prejudice others wore around them." The empty glasses, broken pearls, and abandoned fortunes bore silent witness. It was never about money. It was never about property. It was about worth. And Amara Lewis had proven beyond all denial. She needed no crown, no estate, no title to be royalty. She was born with it. The grand iron doors of the Hawthorne estate swung open with a deep groan, the sound more like an exhale than an announcement. Amara and Victor stepped out together, hand in hand, their fingers woven tightly, as if to anchor each other against the tide of history. They had just changed. The California sun poured over the rolling hills of Napa Valley, setting the vineyards ablaze with gold and green, 1,000 tiny suns shimmering on each leaf. It was not a lavish exit, with trumpets or fanfare. It was simple, almost reverent, a leaving not of defeat, but of deliverance behind them. The estate loomed silent, no longer a symbol of dynastic greed, but a tomb for arrogance and cruelty. The winds carried away the last whispers of betrayal, as if nature itself conspired to cleanse the air. Amara's simple linen dress fluttered in the breeze, her steps light but deliberate. She glanced sideways at Victor, whose profile was carved in sunlight. His features relaxed in a peace he hadn't known for years. No heavy crown of expectation, no gilded shackles of legacy, only love, only truth. They walked down the stone path bordered with blooming jasmine, the scent sweet and sharp, a reminder that even after the most brutal winters, life insists on beginning again. In the distance, the hills stretched endlessly, rolling and generous. The earth itself seemed to hum with approval. Amara closed her eyes briefly, letting the warmth of the sun kiss her skin, feeling the dust of 1,000 judgments finally fall away. No cameras, no reporters, no contracts, No heirs, sharpening their knives. Just them, just freedom. Victor squeezed her hand gently, and in that silent gesture was a vow stronger than any signed document. Home is wherever you are. He whispered, his voice barely more than breath. Amara smiled, a real smile, unguarded and luminous. And love, she said, is the only legacy I care to leave. They didn't look back. There was no need. The past was done. Its fires, spent its lessons, seared into the marrow of those who remained. They had walked through the storm, and now together, they were stepping into a new dawn under the endless sky of Napa Valley. Two souls stitched back together by truth, carrying nothing but hope. As the golden light sank deeper into the valley, as the last echoes of cruelty faded into silence, one truth remained, standing clear against the endless sky. It was never the linen dress, never the simple flats, never the skin tone kissed by the sun. It was the heart, the soul, the quiet dignity that no insult could tarnish, no inheritance could inflate, no cruelty could diminish in a world eager to judge by appearances, eager to label and divide. Amara and Victor had proven an ancient truth, new again. Color does not define worth possessions. Do not measure humanity. It is the heart, and only the heart that ever could. The vineyards of Napa Valley whispered it in their leaves. The sun inked it across the horizon, and the earth itself seemed to hold its breath in reverence. Let this story not fade into just another tale told and forgotten. Let it burn a little brighter in your mind. Let it sit heavy and unshakable in your chest. Judge less, love more. Do not be so quick to mock what you do not understand, or scorn what does not glitter in the right light. Remember that dignity cannot be worn, like jewelry, or draped in silks. It lives quietly in the backbone of those who endure with grace, who love without bargaining, who stand even when the world tells them to kneel. If this story moved something in you, let it live, not just in your memory, but in your actions. Be the voice that cuts through laughter, meant to wound. Be the hand that steadies, not the finger that points. Be the proof that kindness is not weakness, but the fiercest strength of all, because in the end, it will not be your wealth, your status, or your pedigree that defines your worth. It will be the love you gave, the dignity you honored, and the bridges you chose to build when others only saw walls. Share this story. Carry its fire, and when the world forgets, remind them skin may cloak the body, but only the heart reveals the soul. In a world that worships appearances and tramples dignity, Amara Lewis rose not with revenge, but with truth. Her skin, her silence, her strength tore the masks off every false smile in that room. They laughed at her, they mocked her, and in doing so, they destroyed themselves. Remember this: cruelty is a mirror that shatters the hand that holds it. The next time you judge a stranger by what they wear, where they come from, or the color of their skin, ask yourself, are you building your future or burning it to ash?